A police officer was driving through a raging snowstorm when he suddenly heard the faint cries of a dog. Following the sound, he found a pregnant German shepherd curled up and whimpering against a tree, her body trembling, her eyes begging for help. She was tied, abandoned, and close to giving birth. But what happened next would not only save her life, it would uncover a secret so powerful it brought an entire town together. What came after will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe every animal deserves love and not loneliness, hit subscribe, because this story might just change the way you see the world. Blue Ridge, Colorado, winter. 2:17 a.m. The wind howled like a wounded animal, flinging snow sideways across the narrow mountain road. Visibility was down to inches. Officer Daniel Cross squinted through the windshield of his cruiser, wipers scraping in vain against the freezing sleet. The night was a white void, unrelenting, suffocating, alive with cold. Daniel, 36, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a lean, athletic build worn down by sleepless nights. His brown hair, trimmed short under regulation code, had started showing early threads of gray at the temples, scars not of age, but of memory. His gray eyes were sharp but weary, the kind forged through years of seeing more pain than justice. Once hopeful, he had now become a man who spoke only when necessary, who carried silence like armor. Ever since his wife had passed away in a hit-and-run 3 winters ago, her case still unsolved, he had avoided the warmth of connection, choosing instead the company of snow, sirens, and duty. His cruiser rattled as he turned onto the Blue Ridge Pass, a steep, twisting route that snaked along the edge of a cliff overlooking pine-covered valleys. It was technically closed tonight due to the storm, but a tip about suspicious tire tracks earlier that day had stuck in his mind. Something felt off, and then he heard it. A sound beneath the wind. Not the cry of a fox or the screech of tree limbs bowing under ice. This was softer, pained. He slowed the cruiser, rolled down the window a crack. The cold sliced in like a knife. There it was again, a low, aching whimper. He pulled over to the shoulder and stepped out, boots crunching against the thick snowpack. His flashlight cut a narrow tunnel of light through the blizzard. There, curled beside the base of a twisted pine tree, half buried in snow, was a German shepherd. Her coat, once likely a proud sable in black, was now matted with ice and dirt. She was clearly pregnant. Her belly swollen, sides trembling with each breath. One hind leg was bloodied and stiff. Around her neck, a thick rope had been chewed through, still trailing down her side like a noose cut short. Daniel crouched, his voice low. "Hey, girl, you're not supposed to be here." The dog lifted her head just slightly. Brown eyes met gray, not wild, not frightened, just tired and pleading. She didn't move, didn't growl, didn't even flinch when he pulled his blanket from the cruiser and gently draped it over her. "You've been through hell," he muttered. "Haven't you?" The snow stung his face. The wind was rising. If he left her here, she wouldn't survive the hour. Daniel glanced at the curve of the road. No other vehicle tracks, no houses for miles. "This wasn't an accident," he whispered. He scooped her up, gently, cradling her like a child. She was lighter than she should have been, bones too sharp under fur. She didn't resist, just let her head fall against his shoulder, eyes drifting closed. Daniel laid her in the back seat, heater blasting. She gave a soft, raspy sigh. He reached for the radio. Static, of course. The storm had knocked out reception. He started the cruiser, wheels spinning briefly before catching traction, and headed back down the mountain, toward the station, toward shelter. At the Blue Ridge Police substation, the windows flickered with emergency lights, but the building inside was dark. Backup generators hadn't kicked in. Inside, Deputy Claire Morgan stood near the operations board with a flashlight balanced on her shoulder. At 27, Claire was smart, stubborn, and still green enough to think the system could be saved. Her auburn hair was tied in a tight bun under her patrol cap, and her uniform sleeves were rolled halfway to her elbows, revealing small scratches, probably from trying to fix the damn fuse box again. Claire was petite but carried herself like she was 10 feet tall. Her voice could cut through any room. Raised by a single father who was a retired ranger, she'd grown up tracking elk and fixing carburetors. But she hated storms. Not the cold, the silence. Too many things could hide inside silence. She jumped when the station door slammed open, letting in a gust of snow and the figure of Daniel, hunched and holding something wrapped in a wool blanket. Jesus, what the hell? Claire rushed forward, lowering the flashlight. A dog, Daniel said, breathing hard. Pregnant. Bleeding. Left out there to die. Claire pulled the door shut behind them and helped him lay the dog onto a pile of spare blankets near the heater vent. Storm's getting worse, she muttered. Power's not coming back soon. She's not just any stray, Daniel said. There was a rope, chewed through, like she escaped. Claire paused. You think it was abuse? Fights? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He watched as the dog, now resting on her side, let out a weak, tremoring breath. Then he said, No. I think she was running from something. Later that night, as the wind battered the windows and the generator coughed once again into failure, Daniel sat cross-legged beside the dog, flashlight between his knees. He gently cleaned the wound on her leg with warm water and antiseptic. She flinched once, then relaxed. He could feel her ribs under his hands. Too sharp, too frail. Hope, he said softly. Claire looked up from across the room. Huh? I think I'll call her Hope. Claire smiled faintly. Fitting. Daniel leaned back against the wall watching her. The storm howled louder outside. He didn't know yet, but Hope wasn't just a dog left behind. She was the first thread in a knot of secrets still buried in the mountains. And tonight, with a storm clawing at the town and the power flickering like a dying breath, Hope had chosen him. The storm had not yet passed when Daniel turned off the main road and pulled into his gravel driveway. His cabin sat near the edge of Pine Hollow, nestled between evergreens crusted with snow. The house was modest, a single story with faded cedar siding and a tin roof that popped under the weight of falling ice. Lights flickered in the window, running on the backup generator he'd wired himself. It wasn't much, but it was his, the one thing that had felt like home since Emily died. In the back seat, the German Shepherd, now named Hope, stirred faintly beneath the layers of blankets. She hadn't made a sound since leaving the station, save for the occasional twitch of her ears or a weak shudder. Daniel had barely spoken either. The storm outside was quieter than the one still churning inside him. He carried her in carefully, easing open the front door with his foot and stepping into the warmth. The scent of pine wood and old books filled the air. A faded photo of Emily still hung above the fireplace, her smile forever frozen at the edge of memory. Daniel laid Hope on a thick towel beside the hearth where the fire crackled softly. Her eyes fluttered open and fixed on him, just for a second, then closed again. Her breathing was shallow. He picked up his phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in over a year. "Dr. Jennings?" came the groggy voice on the other end. "It's Cross," Daniel said. "I need you to come out. It's urgent." There was a pause. "Daniel, you okay?" "It's not for me. It's a dog. German Shepherd. Pregnant. Bad shape." Another pause, then a sigh. "I'll be there in 20. Dr. Ellen Jennings arrived 23 minutes later, wrapped in a long wool coat and red scarf that clashed with her worn vet bag. She was in her late 40s, with thick black glasses and a sharp, dry wit that often masked a deeply empathetic heart. The kind of woman who once ran an animal shelter single-handedly after a flood wiped out half the county's kennels. She knelt by the dog without a word, brushing snow from her fur and pressing her fingers along the belly. Her brow creased. "She's carrying," she murmured. "At least 5 pups, maybe 6. Can she make it?" Daniel asked, leaning on the doorway. "She's underweight, dehydrated. One leg is partially infected, and her pulse is slow." Ellen looked up. If she was left out much longer, she wouldn't have. "Can you help her?" I'll do what I can." Ellen opened her bag and got to work. Fluids, antibiotics, warm compresses. Daniel helped where he could, holding Hope still as the needle went in, brushing her ears when she flinched. It took over an hour, but eventually Hope's breathing began to steady. "She's not out of the woods," Ellen said finally, wiping her hands. "But you brought her in just in time." Daniel sat back, exhausted. "She's got a name now. Hope." Ellen gave a tired smile. Fitting. She glanced around the cabin, taking in the quiet, the faint scent of cedar, the folded quilt still on the couch. "You've been alone too long, Daniel." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to Hope. "She showed up for a reason. I don't think it's random." Ellen hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Some dogs, they find who they're meant to find, especially the broken ones." Before she left, Ellen handed him a small kit with instructions. "Call me if anything changes, and keep her warm." The storm had eased by morning. Snow still blanketed the mountains, but the wind had fallen silent, and the world outside looked softer, less threatening. Inside, Hope hadn't moved, but her breathing was steady now. Her ears occasionally flicked at the crackle of the fire. Daniel sat nearby, reading a worn copy of Old Yeller, not for entertainment, just to keep his mind still. A knock sounded on the door. Daniel opened it to find Mr. Walter Whitaker, his neighbor from 3 houses down, standing in a thick canvas jacket and trapper hat dusted with snow. Whitaker was in his early 70s, wiry and stooped, with the kind of wiry mustache that curled at the edges. A former electrician and volunteer firefighter, he was the sort who grumbled at everything but showed up exactly when needed. "You know your front generator's blinking red?" he said without greeting. Daniel blinked. "Didn't notice." "Course you didn't. You got a dog in there." Whitaker stepped past him without waiting and made straight for the side panel outside. "Heard you were out late last night. Folks at the diner said you were seen up near the pass." "There was a dog," Daniel said, following. "Pregnant. Hurt. I brought her back." Whitaker grunted. "Seems like that's the 3rd one in 2 weeks. Saw another mutt limping around the tracks near Carson Trail. And Shelley behind the market said she found a collar buried behind her shed." Daniel stopped. "You're saying dogs are being dumped?" "Seems like more than coincidence," Whitaker muttered, squinting at the panel. "Got a flashlight?" He handed one over, and for the next 20 minutes the 2 men worked to reset the generator connection. It was small talk at first, snow loads, old fuse tricks, but Whitaker's voice lowered when he asked, "You think someone's doing it on purpose?" Daniel didn't answer right away, then, "I think Hope was running from something, and she led me back." Whitaker gave him a look, not skeptical, not mocking, just quiet understanding. Then maybe it's time someone started asking the right questions. By sunset, the cabin was quiet again. Daniel set out fresh water for Hope and crushed pills into soft food, placing the bowl beside her. She sniffed it weakly, then took a bite. It wasn't much, but it was the first step. He sat beside her again, hand resting lightly on her flank. "You made it here for a reason," he whispered. Hope lifted her head just slightly. Her nose nudged against his wrist, and Daniel, for the first time in months, smiled. Just a little. By the 3rd morning, the snow had hardened into a brittle crust along the shoulders of Blue Ridge Pass. Ice clung to tree branches like crystal veins, and the sharp wind had quieted into silence, a silence that felt too deliberate, too aware. Daniel packed his thermos, pulled on his service boots, and gently scratched behind Hope's ears before stepping out. She was stronger now, eyes alert but cautious, and had even begun to shift her weight and sit up unassisted. He hated leaving her, even for a short while, but something had lodged in his chest since she arrived. A thread left untugged. It was time to return to where it all began. Daniel's cruiser hummed along the icy road, tires crunching against frostbitten gravel. He drove slowly, eyes sweeping the curves of the pass where he had first seen Hope. At a bend just before the ridge's crest, he stopped the engine. The memory returned instantly. The huddled shape in the snow, the blood speckling the white, the wind wailing like a wounded thing. He stepped out, flashlight in hand, boots sinking into the snowpack. At first, it looked like nothing, just a stretch of empty road. But 10 paces in, past the shoulder and down a short slope, he spotted the first clue: tire tracks. Not from a sedan or SUV. These were deeper, wider, with a distinct dual tread pattern that screamed cargo truck. Daniel crouched, brushing snow from the frozen mud beneath. The tracks turned into a clearing, where the underbrush had been trampled. Then he saw it. A metal cage, half buried in snow, its door torn at the hinges. Bits of fur still clung to the wire mesh. The smell of rust and something darker clung to the air. Daniel's jaw tightened. This wasn't a random abandonment. This was organized. He took photos, documented what he could. He was about to head back when he heard it, a low, deliberate bark echoing faintly in the stillness. Hope. She had followed him. Daniel turned to see her at the crest of the hill, limping but determined, nose low to the ground. Her sable coat shimmered faintly under the pale sun, the silver streaks along her back like scars of smoke. She stopped near the cage, sniffed intently, and then barked once more, turning toward the thick tree line to the west. Her eyes locked onto his, insistent. "You smell something," Daniel murmured. Hope barked again and pawed at the snow, her body tense, alert. He didn't press further. She'd done enough for today. He lifted her carefully into the truck bed, wrapped her in a blanket, and drove them both home. That afternoon, he brought his findings to the station. Inside the Blue Ridge Sheriff's Department, the atmosphere was tense. Power had returned to most of the town, but morale lagged behind. Paperwork was backed up, phones rang without answers. And in the middle of the bullpen sat Deputy Claire Morgan, scrolling through missing animal reports with a highlighter in one hand and a cold cup of coffee in the other. Claire was 27, sharp-eyed, with a wiry, athletic frame and a ponytail of chestnut hair that always slipped loose by noon. She was known for being both relentlessly curious and stubborn to the point of irritating her superiors, but Daniel trusted her judgment more than most. She'd grown up in Blue Ridge and had joined the force after an injury ended her soccer scholarship at Colorado State. That loss made her fight even harder, for animals, for kids, for people no one else noticed. Daniel dropped a photo of the cage on her desk. Claire looked up. "That from where you found her?" He nodded. "Big rig tires, cage discarded. She wasn't alone." Claire frowned, then reached beneath the stack of reports and pulled out a file marked in red. "You might want to see this. I ran a pattern this morning. There's been an uptick in calls about missing dogs, mostly large breeds, shepherds, Rottweilers, even a couple of mixed mutts, all in the past 2 months, all from areas near highway access." Daniel leafed through the pages. It wasn't just coincidence. These weren't pets running off. They were being taken, and the pattern hinted at trafficking. "Any leads?" he asked. "Nothing solid. A few witnesses mentioned seeing a white van. No plates. One said it was parked near the old quarry trailhead last week, but by the time I got there it was gone." Daniel exhaled slowly. "You think it's a ring?" Claire nodded grimly. "It's too organized to be anything else. Rumor says some of these dogs end up in illegal fights. Others are sold for testing." The mention hit Daniel like a punch to the ribs. He turned away, gripping the edge of the filing cabinet. A flash of memory surged. His wife Emily, bright-eyed and stubborn, brushing hair from her forehead as she cradled a rescued greyhound in her arms. She had spent her life as a veterinary advocate, fighting illegal breeding, pushing for tougher regulations. She had died in a highway crash 2 winters ago, on her way home from a rural clinic where she'd just helped shut down an unlicensed lab. Now this. Back at the cabin that evening, Daniel built the fire higher and laid a hand gently over Hope's flank. She looked at him, and in her gaze was no fear, only trust. "You didn't just survive," he whispered. "You came back to lead me." Hope licked his fingers, then pressed her head against his chest. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, revealing muddy tracks and frozen grass. But in Daniel's heart, something else was thawing, the sense that perhaps he wasn't just fighting for justice. He was finishing what Emily had started. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape cloaked in hush. The snow, once windswept and savage, now lay blanketed across Blue Ridge like a sleeping beast, undisturbed and glittering beneath the pale light of a waning moon. At the edge of town, in the small timber cabin nestled near the tree line, Daniel Cross sat quietly on the floor beside Hope's bed. Hope's breathing had changed, no longer shallow from pain, but strained with purpose. Her eyes, golden and wide, darted to Daniel's face, then back to her belly, swollen and trembling with life. He leaned closer and whispered, "I'm here. We're going to get through this, girl." He had made the space as warm as possible. Old quilts covered the floor. A portable heater hummed in the corner. Next to him, Deputy Claire Morgan had her sleeves rolled up, a towel in one hand, a flashlight in the other. She'd come after her shift, saying simply, "Didn't think you should do this alone." Hope grunted, then let out a soft, low whine. Her back legs kicked. The first pup was coming. Claire, usually composed, looked visibly shaken. "She's so calm. I don't know how." "She's stronger than most people I know," Daniel said. The birth was a slow, sacred thing. One by one, the pups emerged, wet, wriggling, blind. Daniel placed them gently beside Hope, who licked each one with deliberate care. Her body shook with exhaustion, but her eyes never wavered. She knew what to do. Even in pain, even half-healed from her wounds, Hope protected and nourished. 5 lives brought into the world in the dead of night, surrounded by pine-scented silence and a man who hadn't smiled in years now weeping quietly. They didn't speak for a long time after. Claire, seated beside the fire, cradled a pup in her palm, astonished by its size and warmth. Daniel simply watched Hope, who had curled herself around the puppies like a fortress of fur and breath. And then, a sound. A low growl. Hope stiffened, her ears perking despite her fatigue. Her nose twitched. She growled again, deeper this time, and turned her head toward the window. Daniel and Claire followed her gaze. Nothing. But Hope wouldn't settle. Then Daniel heard it, the faint crunch of snow underfoot. He stood up silently and moved toward the window, flicking off the porch light as he passed. His breath fogged the cold glass. At first he saw only trees, but then a shadow. It moved, then stopped. Human height. Watching. Daniel's hand slid instinctively to the grip of the pistol at his belt. Claire joined him, her voice low. "You see it?" He nodded. "Not clearly, but it's there." He opened the door and stepped outside. The cold sliced into him like a knife, but he kept moving. Snow muffled his boots. The yard stretched toward the woods, and in the half-light he saw faint impressions in the snow. Fresh prints, leading from the tree line to the cabin, then curving back. No vehicle. Whoever it was had come on foot. "Coward," Daniel muttered. He knew this kind of stalking wasn't random. It meant someone was keeping tabs, watching not just him, but Hope. Back inside, Hope was still growling, her body tense but curled protectively around her pups. Daniel knelt beside her and whispered reassurance. It took minutes for her breathing to ease. Later, as he poured coffee into mismatched mugs, there was a soft knock at the back door. It was Mr. Whitaker, Daniel's elderly neighbor, bundled in a wool coat and carrying a lantern. "Sorry to bother you this late, son," he said, voice roughened by age and smoke, "but I heard something out by the fence line. Figured I'd check on you." Daniel waved him inside. Mr. Whitaker was wiry and short, with a thick gray beard and a permanent squint that made him look perpetually suspicious of the world. He lived alone in a cabin 2 properties over and had once worked as a logger before his knees gave out. Despite his bluntness, he'd always had a soft spot for dogs and Daniel. The old man glanced at Hope and her pups, then gave a low whistle. "Well, I'll be. She made it." "She did," Daniel said, "but someone was outside earlier." Whitaker nodded slowly. "Saw a truck last night. Big one, didn't recognize it. No lights, no plates. Parked off the service road near the old ranger station. Stayed there for about 10 minutes, then backed out and drove off." Claire straightened. You didn't get a look at the driver? Too far, but I don't like how quiet they were. Daniel's jaw tightened. The pieces were coming together too fast. The cage, the missing dogs, Hope's escape. And now someone circling back. For her? Or for the evidence she might represent? He looked down at the puppies, all now asleep in a tight pile against their mother's belly. Hope opened her eyes and looked straight at him. She had survived abandonment, injury, and freezing cold to bring these lives into the world. And she was warning him. They weren't safe yet. The next morning broke gray and cold, the mountains cloaked in mist, the sun little more than a pale suggestion behind the clouds. Daniel stood by the porch, sipping lukewarm coffee from a tin mug, eyes scanning the tree line beyond his snow-laced fence. Hope lay nearby on a flannel blanket, her pups nestled against her belly, but she was restless, ears twitching, eyes fixed toward the north. She was listening for something, or remembering. Daniel noticed it immediately. A tension in her muscles, a low whimper every few minutes, the way her eyes kept flicking toward the woods. Something wasn't right. He bent down, scratching behind her ear. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" Hope stood. Slowly, stiffly, still recovering from labor, she nudged Daniel's leg with her nose and gave a soft bark. Then she limped toward the steps, pausing only to look back at him. He didn't question her instinct. Within 15 minutes, Daniel had secured the pups in a warm carrier box inside the cabin, radioed Claire for backup, and followed Hope in his truck. She sat in the passenger seat, panting quietly, alert, her nose pressed to the cracked-open window. They drove past the ranger station, through old mining trails, and toward the edge of Blue Ridge's industrial zone, a cluster of rusted buildings long since abandoned. The trail ended at an old access road hidden behind a tangle of birch trees. Daniel stopped the truck and stepped out. Hope jumped down, landed unsteadily, and padded ahead. Her nose to the snow, she led Daniel to a warehouse tucked behind a fallen billboard that once advertised tractor parts. Its windows were boarded up. One side door had fresh boot prints in the snow. Daniel crouched beside them. The prints were large, deep. Someone had come here recently. He moved carefully, drawing his flashlight and pushing the side door open with a creak. The smell hit him first. Sour, metallic, and foul. He stepped inside and froze. The interior was dimly lit by cracks in the roof. Wire cages lined the walls. Inside, at least 20 dogs lay silently, some too weak to lift their heads. German shepherds, pit bulls, even a few golden retrievers, all emaciated. Some had wounds crusted with dried blood. A few whined softly, tails wagging at the sight of a human face. Daniel swallowed hard. His jaw clenched. Hope followed behind, but the moment she stepped inside, her body stiffened. Her ears perked. She sniffed the air and darted toward the far end of the warehouse, to a rusted crate half hidden beneath a tarp. Daniel followed, heart thudding. Hope let out a sharp bark and began pawing at the cage. Inside, curled in a corner, was a small pup. German shepherd markings barely weaned. Its left leg was bandaged clumsily, its ribs visible. It lifted its head and whimpered. Daniel dropped to his knees. Hope pressed her nose through the bars, whining softly. Daniel understood instantly. "This one's yours, isn't it?" He gently opened the latch and lifted the pup out. Hope began licking it immediately, whining and wagging her tail despite her weakness. The pup nestled against her chest. The moment was broken by a sudden noise, the distant rumble of a car engine. Daniel moved quickly, tucking the pup into his coat and pulling Hope behind a stack of wooden pallets. From the corner of his eye, he saw a white van pull up outside. 2 men exited, both heavy-set, both in stained overalls. One lit a cigarette while the other opened the rear doors. They entered the warehouse and began checking the cages. Daniel slid out his phone and hit record, keeping the lens angled just enough to capture their faces and actions. "You think the cops are onto us yet?" one man grunted. "Nah," said the other. "We moved the last shipment already. This dump's just the overflow. Another week and we torch it." Daniel's pulse quickened. They weren't just criminals. They were erasing evidence, and they'd already trafficked dogs elsewhere. He waited until they returned to the van before slipping outside, circling the warehouse's opposite side to his truck. Hope followed, the pup still bundled in his coat. Daniel drove away in silence, staying off the main roads until they reached a safer zone near the old grain silo. He dialed Claire immediately. She answered on the first ring. "Daniel, you okay?" "I found them," he said. "Cages, dozens of dogs, injured, malnourished. I've got one of the pups, Hope's, I'm sure of it." "Jesus," Claire whispered. "You have any video?" "Got their faces, and a confession." There was a pause. "You need to call in the feds." Daniel hesitated. "You sure?" Claire's voice firmed. "This is bigger than us, Daniel. We can't dismantle this alone. If they're moving animals out of state, it's federal. Call the FBI." He hung up, stared at the mountains in the distance, then opened the passenger door. Hope and her pup were curled together on the seat, breathing slow and steady. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "FBI Denver Field Office," came the voice on the line. Daniel took a deep breath. "My name is Officer Daniel Cross. I have evidence of an interstate animal trafficking operation operating out of Blue Ridge. I need assistance, and I've got one hell of a witness with 4 legs." The air was thinner that morning as Daniel took the mountain road in his truck, winding higher into the Blue Ridge Pass. Snow from last week's storm had turned to gray slush near the base but still clung in patches along the ridges. The clouds overhead were slate-colored, heavy with more to come, and the wind carried the bite of something ominous. Hope sat in the back seat, unusually alert, eyes scanning the tree line like a sentinel. They were on their way to meet a contact from the Denver FBI office, but Daniel chose a more remote path, wanting to keep his vehicle unseen for a while. He wasn't paranoid, at least he didn't think he was, but something had shifted ever since he'd discovered that warehouse. The 2 men he filmed were still out there, and if they knew he had footage... As the truck rounded a bend near a crumbling guardrail, Hope stiffened and gave a low growl. "What is it, girl?" Daniel murmured, slowing the truck. The road ahead looked clear. Then everything exploded in a blur. A pickup truck barreled from a hidden trail on the left, its front grille slamming into the side of Daniel's truck. Metal screamed. Daniel's head snapped sideways, vision flashing white. The force pushed his vehicle against the embankment, one tire lifting off the ground. He groaned and reached for his sidearm just as the door was yanked open. A man loomed over him, masked in a black ski mask, muscular arms clad in a torn brown jacket. He wasn't yelling, he was silent, focused, efficient. He swung a crowbar down toward Daniel's face. Daniel rolled just in time. The blow caught his shoulder. Pain flared, but he managed to raise his foot and kick the attacker back into the snow. The second figure appeared, a shorter, wiry man with pale eyes and a tattoo crawling up his neck. He lunged forward, fists clenched. But that was the moment Hope launched herself from the truck bed. The German Shepherd landed on the taller man first, teeth bared, jaws locking onto his forearm. He screamed, trying to shake her off, but she held fast, her body moving with practiced aggression. Not wild, trained. The second man raised his arm to strike her, but Daniel had already drawn his weapon. "Drop it!" he barked. The man froze. For a heartbeat, the mountain was filled only with ragged breaths, falling snow, and the deep, warning growl coming from Hope. Both attackers took a slow step back. Hope stayed between them and Daniel, hackles raised, her muzzle red. Daniel didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot into the air. That did it. The men fled back to their vehicle and tore off down the trail they'd come from, leaving muddy tracks behind. Daniel dropped to his knees beside Hope. "You saved my life." Hope's tail gave a soft wag. She whimpered and licked at the blood trickling down Daniel's temple. He looked at her differently now. She wasn't just a survivor. She'd fought like a trained protector, like a canine. The precision in her lunge, the way she had positioned herself, he had seen that before, years ago on patrol. Later that afternoon, after cleaning his wound at home and sending the incident footage to Claire, Daniel received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Whitaker shuffled up the porch steps carrying a dented old briefcase and 2 steaming thermoses of cocoa. His wiry frame was bundled in a brown parka, and his white beard danced in the wind like brittle cotton. "I heard gunshots echo up the ridge," he said gruffly, handing Daniel a cup. "You okay, son?" "Got ambushed," Daniel replied, his arm wrapped in gauze. "Hope saved me." Mr. Whitaker nodded solemnly, then tapped the briefcase. "I think it's time I tell you something." They moved inside, where the pups were still dozing in their bedding and Hope curled protectively around them. Whitaker sat on the wooden rocking chair by the fireplace, sipping cocoa. "Back in the 80s, I worked undercover for the Interstate Animal Trafficking Unit. We were tracing a network that stretched from New Mexico to Wyoming. Fought hard to shut it down, but it scattered into smaller cells." He opened the briefcase, revealing yellowed folders, Polaroids, and case notes. "I thought the trail had gone cold, until I saw that warehouse you filmed." Daniel leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You recognize it?" "Not the location," Whitaker said, "but the methods. Look here, these crate markings, tag numbers. They're similar. Some of these names match the aliases our targets used back then, and we always suspected they used canine dogs either stolen from departments or recruited from retired stock." Daniel's stomach dropped. "You think Hope might have been one of them?" Whitaker studied the dog. Her reaction today wasn't just maternal instinct. That was tactical defense. Someone trained her. Maybe she was taken from her handler. Maybe they tried to use her for fighting or breeding, but she resisted. Daniel looked at Hope again this time, not just with affection, but awe. "Then she's not just a victim, she's a witness." Whitaker nodded. "And maybe the key." Before leaving, Whitaker handed over copies of old warrants, suspect sketches, and a map dotted with abandoned transport hubs. "FBI will want this," he said quietly. That night, Claire came by with updates. She had shoulder-length blonde hair, usually tied back in a ponytail, and wore her standard fleece patrol jacket over jeans. She was quick-witted, fiercely loyal, and one of the few people Daniel trusted completely. "The Bureau's sending someone out tomorrow. They saw your footage, said it's the break they've been waiting for." Daniel exhaled, relieved. Claire walked over to Hope and crouched, stroking her head gently. "You're something else, girl." Hope licked her hand and returned to her pups. As the fire cracked and the mountain wind howled outside, Daniel sat with the others and reviewed the files Whitaker had brought. Each page was another piece of the puzzle. Each document proof that the storm wasn't over, it was just circling back. But now he wasn't alone. He had hope. And the snare was tightening. The dawn broke over Pine Hollow with an unusual stillness, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. Frost sparkled on the pine branches, and the distant sound of engines echoed from the ridge. Daniel stood in the yard, coat zipped high, watching as a convoy of unmarked black SUVs wove its way through the wooded trail toward his cabin. The moment had come. Hope sat beside him, no leash needed. She stood poised, ears slightly back, one eye watching the road, the other flicking toward her pups who were nestled in a padded crate near the porch. Her posture was noble, like a general awaiting allies. The lead vehicle pulled up and outstepped Special Agent Mia Morales, a woman in her early 40s with olive skin, short-cropped dark hair, and a trench coat that moved with purpose. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and carried herself with the calm intensity of someone who had spent decades chasing monsters that lurked in daylight. Behind her, two younger agents flanked her silently: Agent Lopez, lanky and clean-shaven, and Agent Brody, stocky with a buzz cut and a faint southern drawl. "You're Daniel Hayes?" Morales extended her hand firmly. "I am," Daniel replied, shaking it. "And this must be Hope." Morales crouched slightly, letting the German Shepherd sniff her hand. Hope wagged her tail, once reserved but accepting. "We've heard a lot about you, girl." They moved quickly. The plan was to raid the abandoned warehouse before noon. Claire arrived in her patrol SUV, wearing tactical gear and her auburn ponytail tucked under a black cap. Her presence eased Daniel's nerves. Together, they reviewed the layout, entry points, and Whitaker's maps. The old man stayed back at the cabin, nursing arthritis and sorting through more documents, but his earlier intelligence had helped fill critical gaps. The warehouse wasn't just a holding site, it was a distribution hub. A junction in a much larger pipeline stretching across 4 states. Morales led the briefing. "We'll go in silent. No sirens. We want them unaware. Animal control units are on standby nearby. If what you say is true, there may be dozens of dogs inside. The operation began before the sun climbed over the mountain tops. The team moved like shadows. SUVs parked a quarter-mile out. Agents slipped through the trees. Daniel stayed with Claire, Hope beside them, her body tense with memory. She knew this place. She had smelled these walls, feared these footsteps. As they neared the warehouse, muffled sounds emerged. Metal clinks, low growls, human voices. The building was a patchwork of rusted tin and tarps, barely upright, but inside the horror was intact. Morales gave the signal. Doors burst open. Chaos erupted, but only for a moment. The handlers inside were too slow, too surprised. One tried to flee but was tackled by Agent Brody. Another shouted, but Claire shoved him to the ground, cuffs snapping into place. Dogs barked, whined, scrambled. Daniel and Hope entered last. The sight made his stomach twist. Cages, dozens of them. Some stacked, some broken. Inside, animals in varying states of trauma, eyes wide, ribs visible, fur matted. And, amidst them, the unmistakable presence of working dogs. German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, even a Labrador with a scarred muzzle and faded police vest. Some wore rusted tags. Others bore chipped ears and surgical tattoos. Hope moved swiftly past the cages, sniffing. She stopped at one inside was a shepherd barely older than her, thin but regal. Their noses touched through the bars. A low, mournful whine echoed between them. Morales stepped forward. "We'll get them out. All of them." By sunset, the town buzzed with a mix of shock and triumph. News crews arrived. Claire gave a brief statement, flanked by Morales and Daniel. Hope stood beside them, her image captured by every lens. Reporters called her the survivor, the key witness, the miracle mother. Claire's voice rang through the microphones. "Today's victory is thanks to the courage of one dog and the man who chose to listen to her story. Pine Hollow is no longer silent." In the following days, the town transformed. Volunteers gathered. A temporary shelter was built on the fairgrounds, a makeshift sanctuary filled with hay beds, heat lamps, and kindness. Children painted signs with phrases like "You are loved" and "Heroes have 4 legs." Daniel and Claire worked side by side organizing food drives and medication drop-offs. Claire's ability to coordinate under pressure, her sharp tongue balanced with fierce empathy, won her the affection of both townsfolk and the FBI. She and Daniel shared quiet looks, now and smiles over coffee, lingering hands when brushing past crates. Something deeper was growing, though neither spoke of it yet. Hope and her pups were given a special enclosure near the shelter's entrance. People lined up just to see her. Children drew pictures of her with capes and medals. One little girl left a hand-drawn card that read, "Thank you for saving the forgotten voices." And yet, through all the celebration, Daniel remained grounded. One evening, he sat with Mr. Whitaker on the porch. The old man wore his wool cap low and sipped from a chipped mug. "You did good, son," Whitaker said, tapping his cane. "This town's been hollow for a long time. You filled something we forgot was even missing." Daniel looked at Hope sleeping beside her pups. "I didn't fill it. She did." Whitaker nodded. "Sometimes it takes a soul that's suffered to awaken others." Later that night, Daniel knelt beside Hope and whispered, "They finally see you now. You brought light into a place that forgot how to hope." Hope opened one eye and gave a quiet sigh. Her pups nestled against her belly, safe. The past would never be erased, but it no longer had the final word. The town of Pine Hollow had begun to heal, and it all started with a mother who refused to be silent. The last of the snow melted slowly, like a curtain lifting from a long, haunted performance. Pine Hollow emerged into spring not just with blooming crocuses and longer days, but with a new heartbeat, steady, warm, and full of purpose. Daniel stood on the front porch of his cabin, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise stretch across the clearing. Hope lay at his feet, her ears flicking gently with the breeze. Her 5 pups, now rambunctious furballs, tumbled over one another in the wet grass, yipping and growling with mock ferocity. The cabin, once dim and silent, had changed. Daniel had taken down the thick curtains. Light now streamed freely through the windows. Walls that had borne the weight of memory were freshly painted, adorned with framed photos of the rescue, of Hope and the pups, of Claire laughing beside them in muddy boots. Claire had become a near-daily visitor. Most mornings she arrived in her off-duty jeans and plaid shirts, sometimes with a toolbox, sometimes with bags of supplies. Her hair, no longer tightly bound in a tactical ponytail, now flowed freely with a softness Daniel hadn't seen before. One afternoon, while hammering a fence post into the ground, Claire wiped sweat from her brow and grinned. "You know," she said, "I think this place is missing a name." Daniel glanced up. "What kind of name?" She stood, hands on her hips, surveying the land. "Something that says it's more than your home now. Something like Shepherd's Haven." Hope, as if sensing the importance of the moment, let out a low, approving bark, and so it began. The idea had grown like wildflowers. What started as a nickname became a mission. Daniel and Claire, with Hope at their side, began converting the property into a sanctuary for abandoned and rescued animals. Kennels were built. A training yard was cleared. A small wooden sign, carved by a local artisan named Elias Monroe, was placed near the road. Elias, a white-haired woodworker in his 70s with calloused hands and a quiet, reverent nature, had etched each letter by hand. Shepherd's Haven, the sign read, where second chances find their pause. News of the project spread quickly. Volunteers came from town and beyond. Some brought old crates and food donations. Others offered veterinary services, building materials, or simply time. Teenagers painted murals on the outer walls, bright depictions of dogs leaping over meadows, a smiling Hope leading a pack beneath a golden sun. But the most unexpected gift came from Mr. Whitaker. One morning, he knocked on Daniel's door, bundled in his usual wool coat and carrying a rolled-up parchment in his gloved hands. His face, lined with years of both sorrow and wisdom, looked unusually determined. "I want to give you something," he said simply. He unrolled a land deed, an official document declaring a donation of 5 acres of adjacent woodland. "This land belonged to my late wife's family," he explained. "She always wanted to see it used for something good, something lasting." Daniel's voice caught in his throat. "Are you sure?" Whitaker looked out toward Hope, now lying in the grass beside her growing pups. "I've seen enough bad things in this world, son. It's time I help grow something good." The donated land became an extension of the Haven walking paths, quiet recovery zones, even a memorial garden for the dogs who didn't make it. Claire helped plant wildflowers along the path. Daniel built benches beneath the old oak trees. Hope's role shifted naturally. She became a matriarch, not just to her pups, but to every new arrival. Whenever a frightened dog came in, trembling and unsure, Hope would approach with careful, motherly grace. She'd sniff gently, nudge softly, and wait patiently until they calmed. Her presence was steadying, reassuring. The town now spoke of her not as a victim, but as a guardian. Kids visiting the shelter called her Queen Hope. Seniors brought blankets they'd knitted just for her pups. Local law enforcement officers dropped by to check on the dogs they once thought were lost forever. One of the most moving arrivals was a dog named Bruno, a thick-set black Labrador with a broken leg and cloudy eyes. He had once been a firehouse dog in a different state, displaced during a storm and presumed dead. When he arrived at the shelter, growling and distrustful, Hope was the only one he allowed near. Within days, he began following her like a shadow. Claire often joked, "You've built a kingdom, Daniel, and she's your ruling queen." Daniel would laugh, but deep down he knew it was true. One warm afternoon, while planting marigolds along the fence, Daniel looked over to see Claire standing near the porch. In her hands was a soft leather collar. It was engraved with a single word: Guardian. "She deserves it," she said, slipping the collar gently around Hope's neck. The shepherd looked up, tail wagging once in solemn understanding. That evening, the Haven hosted its first community gathering. Tables were laid out with food and lemonade. A bluegrass trio played from the porch steps. Children ran through the field, pups chasing after them. Hope, now graying around the muzzle, stood at the center, surrounded by laughter, love, and life. Daniel took a quiet moment, stepping back from the crowd. He gazed at the flickering lanterns, the joy radiating from every corner of the field, and felt something lift from his chest. He thought of his late wife, of her dream to help animals, of the quiet days when the cabin had echoed with silence. And now it echoed with barking and joy. The past would always be part of him, but it no longer ruled him. Hope brushed against his leg, her gaze soft and loyal. He leaned down, forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Pine Hollow glowed not just from lanterns, but from hearts rekindled. And in the center of it all, a dog named Hope had proven what no one expected, that light, once lost, could find its way home again. Sometimes God sends us angels not with wings, but with paws, scars, and eyes that have seen too much, yet still choose to love. Hope wasn't just a dog. She was a survivor, a protector, a guide sent at the exact moment when darkness seemed too heavy to bear. Through her, Daniel found purpose again. A town found unity, and dozens of lost souls found shelter and love. This story reminds us that even the most broken can become the greatest blessing. That what the world throws away, heaven often uses for miracles. In your life, you may feel abandoned, forgotten, or wounded, but just like Hope, your scars might become someone else's salvation. So if you believe in second chances, in divine timing, in the quiet power of animals to heal what humans cannot, then let this story stay with you. Share this video with someone who needs a little light. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, type Amen in the comments and say a prayer for all the animals still waiting to be saved. And don't forget to subscribe, because there's more hope-filled stories waiting to be told. May God bless every heart that watches this, and may you never forget, sometimes a miracle walks on 4 legs.